You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
It used to be basically twice as many for the all reds version than the all whites. And they've been getting closer and closer together. And last year, finally, they switched. So we saw that. We also have seen, if you looked at what we sold wholesale last year, if you looked at the wines that we have red and white and rosé versions of, like the Esprit and the Côte and the Patelin, we basically saw all of our growth come from the white wine side of things. We saw 30% growth in depletions on whites, and reds and rosés were basically flat.
Welcome back to Business of Drinks. I'm Erica Ducey.
And I'm Scott Rosenbaum. Today we're talking with one of the most forward-thinking leaders in American wine, Jason Haas, proprietor of Tablas Creek Vineyard.
If you work in wine, chances are you've heard of Tablas Creek. It's the pioneering Paso Robles winery, co-founded by the Haas family and the legendary Perrin family of Château de Beaucastel back in 1989. Now, not only did they help put Rhône varieties on the map in California, they've also become one of the most influential names in sustainable winemaking.
Absolutely. And what makes Tablas Creek such an interesting case study is that they've stayed true to their mission for decades, even when market conditions were pushing in the opposite direction. Today, they produce around 30 to 35,000 cases annually, and more than 80% of their revenue comes from direct-to-consumer sales channels. I actually remember visiting Tablas Creek in the early 2000s and what importance their newsletter had. I went online and found that they have their whole archive going back to 2002, 2003. Those newsletters are still there. So, this DTC model has proven really resilient for the brand. And they've achieved this all while becoming the first ever regenerative organic certified winery in the world.
Yeah, and in this conversation, Jason walks us through the brand's evolution from introducing Rhône varieties like Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre to American audiences, all the way through to educating consumers on how boxed wine can be a premium and sustainable product. His first ever boxed rosé release a few years ago sold out in 4 hours.
We'll also dive into tactics that are sure to resonate with drinks entrepreneurs. We're going to cover how Tablas Creek doubled their export business with 5 targeted market visits. We're going to cover the email strategy shift that led to a 20% jump in direct-to-consumer sales. We'll cover why Jason believes that $25 to $40, that price tier, is the sweet spot in today's wine economy. And we'll also talk about how being transparent with customers, with partners, and the trade creates exponential brand goodwill.
So, whether you're building a brand or navigating shifts in the wine industry, there's a ton to learn here about staying relevant, scaling intentionally, and leading with values. So, let's get into it. And now, a word from our sponsor. Is your drinks brand looking to start or expand import and distribution?
Whether you're seeking to enter new markets or you're unhappy with a current distributor and desiring a better fit, you should know about Swig Partners.
Founded by industry experts Eric Siegelbaum and Amy Troutmiller, Swig takes the guesswork and the legwork out of distribution strategy. Swig helps brands and distributors find the right fit for long-term relationships and sales success.
US-based importers and distributors should reach out too. With Swig, they can explore new products for free. And brands, you can get $100 off by mentioning Business of Drinks. Find out more at swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks.
Jason, thanks so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thanks, Erica. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. Well, let's hop right in. So, tell me about Tablas Creek's origin story and how you came to run the company.
Sure. There's a lot of backstory to Tablas. That's, I think, one of the things that makes it fun, but also one of the things that makes it hard to do kind of the classic elevator pitch. But we are a partnership, equally owned and run by two families. One of the families is my family. My dad was Robert Haas. He founded the import company Vineyard Brands and was a wine importer all the way going back into the 1950s. The other family is the Perrin family from Château de Beaucastel and Famille Perrin and Miraval and all of the things they're doing in the Rhône Valley, whose wines my dad introduced into the U.S. market in the 1960s. So he became good friends with first the patriarch of the family, whose name was Jacques Perrin, and then his two sons, Jean-Pierre and Francois, and would make trips around the U.S. every couple of months to introduce the Perrin's French wines to the U.S. market. And California was an important part of those trips because it's a huge wine market for imports as well as domestic wines. And this was an era when my dad was also representing some of the first generation of Napa and Sonoma wineries to hit the national scene. So in the 70s, he represented wineries like Kistler and Phelps and Chapelet and Spring Mountain. In the 80s, he helped launch Sonoma Cutrer. And so he was really plugged into California. He was a real believer. And the Perrins, who have always been super interested in the way that things are done elsewhere, would bug him at the end of each of their California trips to take an extra day or two and visit some of these new wine regions that were sprouting up. And they came away from this, first of all, convinced that California was a place where you could make world-class wines, which is kind of a radical idea for a French winemaking family in the 1970s. But equally convinced that there was this opportunity that nobody was stepping into, in that nobody was focusing on the grapes from the Mediterranean part of France in what they thought was clearly a Mediterranean climate. So they looked around and saw lots of Cabernet and Chardonnay and Merlot and Sauvignon Blanc, and they did not see Grenache and Syrah and Mourvedre and Roussanne and Marsanne and Viognier, even though they thought that those would be super well suited to California. So that was kind of the beginnings of the discussions. And in true entrepreneurial spirit, they decided if nobody else was doing it, that they should. So
Yeah.
in 85, they put together a partnership with the Families as Equal Partners, started looking for land, and in 89 bought 120 acres here in the hills west of Paso Robles. So this was all happening sort of when I was in like middle school and high school. I was not a part of any of this other than that there were wine people around all the time. And I spent a fair amount of time in high school, like in summers in high school in France, because if I didn't get myself a summer job, I tended to get sent to a French vineyard or winery to work for the summer.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd spent a couple of summers with the Perrins already. I thought this was so that I could work on my French. I guess my dad had deeper plans in mind here. But
Sounds like it.
um, so I was an East Coast kid. I grew up in Vermont. I went to college and grad school on the East Coast. I worked for 4 years in tech in DC between 98 and '02 because Tablas really wasn't ready for me to come out. It wasn't really a business yet. It was kind of a project. And I didn't want to come straight into a family business right out of school anyway. I didn't feel like I would have brought enough or had enough confidence in my own decisions. So it wasn't until like late '01 that my dad asked if I'd be willing to come out and kind of pay attention to Tablas as a business, because it had turned out to be a lot harder from the business standpoint than he expected. He sort of figured that the major challenges would be on the grape growing, winemaking side. And because of the reputation of Beaucastel and the Perrins, and because of his experience as an importer and distributor, he sort of thought the sales side of things would take care of themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And that turned out not to be the case. It turned out to be a really difficult lift at the beginning because we were making wine that didn't really have a category from a place that nobody knew. And so it ended up being harder at the beginning. So he asked me to come out and pay attention initially to the marketing, and I gradually took over operations over the last 20 years.
Yeah. Amazing. It's such a cool story, and I think a lot of people probably don't know this, how it came about. So, really fun to hear all the twists and turns. For listeners, I think most people in the industry are probably very familiar with Tablas Creek, but for those who are not, can you talk us through the brand and its key attributes and values?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's two things that we hang our hat on. One is that we are one of the pioneers of that kind of Rhone Rangers, California Rhone category, and try to really represent that category through bringing in all of the traditional grape varieties. We now have all 14 of the Châteauneuf-du-Pape grapes in production here at Tablas Creek. We're the only vineyard outside of Châteauneuf-du-Pape that does.
Oh, that's so cool.
Um, and we try to pay this forward in a bunch of different ways. We um, made available all of these cuttings to other growers who wanted to buy and plant them. So we've now got something like 5 million of our cuttings in circulation at other vineyards and wineries from Washington State to Texas and all through California. We do a lot of educational stuff here on these individual varieties, what they bring to the table, what they can do, how you put them together. We've been active in groups like Rhone Rangers, on whose board I've served for most of the last 2 decades, and Hospice du Rhône, and all of that. So that's one piece, I think, of what we hang our hat on. The other piece is on the farming side, where we inherit from Beaucastel a commitment to organic farming. They've been organic since the 1950s. And so that was part of our baseline when we started, that we were going to farm organically because it was going to give us the best possible chance of showing off our terroir, whatever that terroir happened to be. But we've built from there as we've realized that if our goal is to show off our terroir as clearly as possible, we should really be not just replacing chemical inputs with non-chemical inputs, but instead trying to eliminate any inputs from off the farm as possible. So that led us to biodynamic farming. We got our own flock of sheep, started interplanting fruit trees and insectaries and keeping bees and all of that. And then in 2019, we were invited to join the pilot program for a new certification called Regenerative Organic Certified, which for us kind of tied together all of the things that we believed in really neatly, because it's got this great farming protocol, but it's also got pillars on resource use reduction. We were already 100% solar powered. We were already largely dry farmed. So I think that's something which falls outside of the scope of a lot of the more traditional sustainability programs that we really believe in. And then there's finally 2 additional pillars on animal welfare and on farm worker fairness that we felt like were big blind spots in some of the existing certifications. So in 2020, we became the first winery in the world to get that new regenerative organic certification. And then as part of the agreement that we made to be in the pilot program, have basically tried to act as an incubator since then and welcome other people to come and see how we're farming, see how we're navigating the challenges that this brings, and then going out to speak about our experience. So it's kind of those two pieces, trying to be a pioneer within that Rhône movement, and then trying to carry the torch for really great farming.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely resonate with that idea that I feel like Tablas Creek is like the Patagonia of wine, right? Like there are these it's a mission-driven organization, super transparent with all of its learnings, and also wanting to help lift up the next generation. So I think it's just it's so cool to see that you guys have been able to do all those things and still grow. Right? I think that is the sweet spot. Like how is it that you are able to really be a leader in all of these different ways, but find those sort of tactical drivers of growth. Do you have thoughts on how you're able to achieve that when a lot of other companies have really struggled?
It's something I think about a lot. I'm not sure I have all of the answers, but I do think that a lot of it comes down to the fact that wine is not a zero-sum kind of product. It's not like buying a car where if you buy a Honda, you're not also buying a Lexus. So it's different. If a neighbor is producing, a neighbor in Paso Robles is producing a great Cabernet, and a customer buys that cab, that doesn't make them less likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek. It makes them more likely. Same thing if somebody buys a bottle of Washington State Syrah. That doesn't make them less likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek. It makes them more likely. Or somebody who buys a wine from a great regenerative organic certified vineyard up in Napa. That doesn't, again, that's we're part of those categories. And so if we can help the categories succeed, if we can set ourselves up to be kind of a nexus for sharing, a place that other vineyards and wineries look to as a resource and as a positive contributor to the broader community, I'm a strong believer that that comes back to help you in the end. And I do know that there were at the beginning, there were lots of the categories that we were a part of that I felt like meant that we were swimming against the current. So, I mean, Rhône varieties were not an easy sell in the market at the beginning. They've gotten better, but certainly in the 2000s era, when there was a glut of Syrah, like being part of that Rhône category, it did not endear you to your distributors, did not make your life easier. But I think a lot of the things that we have always done, there's now tailwinds instead of headwinds. So, for example, the organic and regenerative organic farming, that's now something which provides, I think, a boost rather than a hurdle that we have to overcome. Paso Robles is as a region, I think, really coming into its own. Instead of having to explain, yes, we're in the Central Coast, we're not far from Santa Barbara, we're halfway between LA and San Francisco. Like now, within the wine trade, people know Paso Robles. People are excited about Paso as a place that's producing wines with good quality and good value. I think the style of wines that we make, which tend to be a little lower in alcohol, a little fresher, and probably in the early years were more distributed towards whites than what people were expecting from Paso. I think that is now helping us.
Yeah.
So, and then I think finally we're making blends mostly, which as a category were a real struggle for a while, and now which is one of the better categories. So I think some of it is that we have stuck true to who we are. We've been able to muddle through the difficult periods and have not jumped around to try to chase trends, but instead have had the ability to stay consistent to the point that now the trends are actually providing support rather than headwinds.
Yeah. All right. Love to hear that. So let's get down to brass tacks. So how much wine is Tablas Creek producing these days?
Depends somewhat on whether we have a frost or whether we have a drought. But in a normal year, we are about between 30 and 35,000 cases a year.
Okay, great. And then what does the product line look like in terms? I know there's the different product tiers and pricing. Can you give me sort of a lay of the land?
Sure. So we make essentially three main tiers of our blends. We make something that we call Patalenda Tablas that is mostly aimed at the wholesale market, which is $28 suggested retail, and which our goal is to have as high a percentage as possible poured by the glass at restaurants around the country. That represents about 40% of our total production of Patalenda Tablas red, white, and rosé, and 90% of that is sold through distribution. Then we've got two higher tiers called Côte Tablas and Esprit de Tablas that are split between distribution and direct to consumer. And those are $40 suggested retail at the Côte Tablas level and $70 at the Esprit de Tablas. That's our flagship. And then we've got a collection of small production blends and 100% varietal wines that we aim at direct to consumer that generally fall in between the Côte and the Esprit in price. So somewhere in that like $45 to $65 range. And those are the kinds of things that we make for our wine club, for our tasting room, and for our DTC business, which is a huge piece of what we do. I mean, more than half of our total volume is sold direct to consumer, which means that something like 80% of our revenue comes from that DTC side. So it's a long stretch from where we were going to be at the beginning, where we were going to make one red wine and one white wine and sell them all through wholesale.
Wow, yeah.
So we had to sort of reinvent our sales model. That was one of the first things that my dad kind of dumped in my lap when I got out here 23 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, just all the shifts in the market that have happened since that time. I know that you and I were discussing a little bit like kind of the pricing, and like that $25 to $40 tier seems to be holding up really well looking at Nielsen data and other sources right now. Why do you think that price benchmark is continuing to show growth and gains?
So I think that price is, I think it's a little bit insulated from the two major issues that are impacting both the very high priced wines and the very low priced wines. I think that if you look at the data of who is buying the very high priced wines and the very low priced wines, those tend to be the boomer generation that are getting to the point where they're not buying as much wine. They may be not drinking as much wine, but they're certainly, if they are regular drinkers, there's a good chance that their cellars are relatively full and they're just drinking what they've got. Um, and I think it surprises people. They don't think of boomers as being the ones who are buying a lot of the 8, 9, 10, 12, $14 wines, but that has always been the cohort which has supported that kind of least expensive tier the strongest. It's also the group which has been most I don't know, responsible for isn't quite the right way to put it, but most supportive of the sort of intense premiumization that has driven the rapid rise at high end prices also. So I feel like that things in the $25 to $40 range, I feel like it appeals to a broader age range of consumers. It feels like it's a price that's high enough that you can get really good quality, but it doesn't feel like it's something which is out of reach. And that's
Yeah.
so I think that's a part of it. I think a part of it is that there's lots of different places that you can sell wines in that price range. At the lower end of that sort of $25 to $30 suggested retail, it's a really good by the glass price for restaurants. And we know that people are still going out, that the restaurant world has held up a lot better than the wine retail world over the last couple of years. So I think that's a part of it. I think there is a fatigue with things that feel like they have gone up in price a lot, and I think wine has this ability to be kind of an affordable luxury, but it doesn't feel like an affordable luxury when it's $150 a bottle. So
Right.
I feel like
Yeah.
that you don't feel like you're getting something cheap or mass produced. If you're getting something that's $33, you can get something that's really good, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like you need to take out a loan to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And just out of curiosity, what's the best-selling SKU right now?
So it's we are a winery who sells everything that we make. So the one that we make the most of is the one that sells the most. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the easiest to sell, but the largest production wine that we make is our Patalenda Tablas Red. So that's that kind of classic red Rhône style blend. I think we made 6,000 cases of it this year. So it's not that there's a single SKU that really dominates what we do. And I, in fact, have have made some pricing decisions so that Patalenda Tablas tier does not start to dwarf the production of our estate wines, because I think there's some real risks in becoming best known for your least expensive wines. I don't want that tier of non-estate wines to be more than about 40% of our production, but given that those three wines make up 40% of our production and the other 29 wines we make in a normal year make up the other 60%, those are the largest ones kind of by the math.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know that we also, seen some different data sources, including SIP Source, really talking a lot about the growth in white blends and, shifting consumer taste just around American consumers moving to whether it's white wines or lighter reds. So at Tablas Creek, how have you seen this evolve? Are you seeing this impact your sales data in real time?
Yeah, we really are. I realized this last year when, for the first time, we had more people sign up for the all white wines version of our wine club than we did for the all red wines version of our wine club. That happened for the first time in 2024. And we've seen the numbers kind of getting closer and closer together. It used to be basically twice as many for the all reds version than the all whites. Um, and they've been getting closer and closer together. And last year, finally, they switched. So we saw that. We also have seen, if you looked at what we sold wholesale last year, if you looked at the wines that we have red and white and rosé versions of, like the Esprit and the Côte and the Patelin, we basically saw all of our growth come from the white wine side of things. We saw 30% growth in depletions on whites, and reds and rosés were basically flat. So we're seeing it both with the direct-to-consumer side of things and in the wholesale side.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just such a dramatic shift in it seems like a fairly short amount of time. And then you've also experimented with bag and box. So what's worked in that arena?
We're a real believer in alternative packaging. I mean, I don't know the extent to which, this is a mostly industry audience. I'm guessing that people hopefully are realizing this, but the glass bottle accounts for basically half of the carbon footprint of the average winery. And so anything that you can do to mitigate that is going to have a big impact on your carbon footprint and your climate goals. So, we have been working to minimize that for a long time. We moved to lightweight glass back in 2010 for all of our wines, including our flagships. We have been selling wine in reusable stainless steel kegs for the last 15 years. And we've been looking for other opportunities to move away from glass, or at least to mitigate the impact of glass. And so a couple of years ago, I did an internal audit of our carbon footprint and posted a graph that the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance had put together, which showed the relative carbon footprints of heavy glass, regular glass, and lightweight glass, because we had moved to lightweight glass, and I was trying to show the benefit of that. And mostly because I didn't want to redo the graph, and I just copied it and included it in the blog that I was writing. There was also a fourth column for bag and box, and I kind of dismissed that bag and box column, even though it showed a big carbon footprint savings, because this was 2020. The association with like bottom shelf grocery store was so strong that I couldn't imagine our wines fitting into that category. But I had it on that image, and I had a comment from a friend when I posted this on our Facebook page, who said, how do you ever expect the category to escape the stigma that it has if a winery like Tablas Creek isn't willing to try? And I thought about it for a while and decided that he was right. And I talked to our team here, and they were enthusiastic about trying it. We rented a little hand filling box machine and decided to do a small run of our Patelin Rosé in boxes in 2022. And I wrote a blog about it. It got a huge response when I was like, maybe we're onto something here. And I was hoping that we would sell that initial release out in a week, because I thought that would be a story.
Yeah.
And realistically, I thought it would probably take us a month to sell out that initial run of 324 boxes. And we sold it out in 4 hours. And
Oh my gosh.
I got to spend the next week responding to frustrated wine club members who were like, I wasn't at my computer. I missed it. Are you going to make more? So we ended up doing a second batch of the rosé, and then larger amounts of the white and the red. And all of those sold very fast to our direct customers. We doubled the production the next year, and they still sold really fast. And Then we added a wholesale component of it last year. And that was a place where it didn't work as well.
Oh,
It
interesting.
has continued to be one of the most popular things that we do for our direct customers, but it's been difficult in wholesale. And I have some speculation as to why that's the case, but so still very successful when you can make the case directly to your end customer, but having to follow all of the links of that chain through the wholesale world has made it harder there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can imagine for, some restaurateurs, if they're thinking about adding this, like, okay, so now instead of having to account for a bottle, now we have to put it on the counter somewhere. Like, I think like the operational challenges of trying to figure out how to fit it right into your program could be a bit of a challenge. But it's interesting. I think one of the most interesting parts was the pricing. So tell me about the pricing of the bag and box products.
Well, I mean, it's a 3 liter box, so there's 4 bottles of wine in there. And this was the Patalena Tablas, which is a $28 bottle of wine. So we decided to price it at $95, which is less than the 4 times the price of the bottle. But there is also savings involved because we're not paying for 4 bottles and 4 labels and 4 capsules, and etc. Um, and I mean, it is sort of a shocking price if what you're used to is the boxes that are on the shelf at 25 or 30 or $35. But I never thought of this as something that was going to go on a shelf with other boxed wines, or at least not in the immediate term. So pricing it based on what's inside it is the only way that I could think of to make it make sense. And again, that's one of the ways where I think having direct contact with your customers, like they get it, they understand that this is 4 bottles of a $28 bottle of wine. So they look at it as a bargain. Whereas if you are the only $95 box on a shelf of $35 boxes, you're probably not playing at the same customer. And in fact, your
Yeah.
customer is probably not even looking at that section of the store.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things is that this was such a success at that higher price point. I think it's just really, the value of having the wine stay fresh for an extended period of time is just so wonderful for a lot of families. I mean, I was just looking at the increase in the number of single family and double family or like two-person household, single person, two-person household data in the US, and like that has really risen dramatically in the past 4 or 5 years. So I think like the opportunity to open a 750 ml is just maybe not for everyone anymore. It just doesn't make sense when you may have to pour half that wine down the drain at the end of the week. So yeah, so I think I did want to talk a little bit about the branding. So talk me through the branding of Tablas Creek and how has it evolved over the years?
So the packaging has actually not evolved all that much. If you look at our early labels, they are instantly recognizable as Tablas Creek. They are the same basic format that we have now. Um, I think you can also tell looking at it that my dad was an admirer of Ridge, and so we try to be very transparent with what we share. We always put things like the percentages of the varietals on the front label. We are honest with our alcohol percentages. We identify the AVA as specifically as we can on the non-estate wines like the Patalan wines. If you look at the back label, we always share the vineyards we get the fruit from with the percentages that come from each one. So we're trying really to use the label as an educational tool. Um, and we dove into that even more deeply, like with the boxes that we sell. So the boxes, having all of that real estate on those 3 liter boxes to talk about, we dedicated an entire panel to essentially like why premium wine in a box. Like why is this something which is good for you, the end consumer? And yes, the carbon footprint is a piece of it, but I don't think that's where we as a winery want to put all of our eggs. We want to talk about why, like you said, why it's so good that it'll stay fresh in your fridge for 2 months, even after you open it, and that it takes up half the space of 4 bottles, and it weighs 7 pounds instead of 11 pounds, and so much more portable. And so anyway, we try to lean in all of our marketing into education, which was something that was driven home to me, that was necessary, sort of our only path forward at the beginning, when we were making blends from grapes that people didn't know and couldn't pronounce in a part of California they'd never heard of, with French names that didn't mean anything to them. Like, if we couldn't get people behind that curtain and into our own thought process, I thought it was going to be an impossibly uphill battle. So that's something that I have thought was really important, and has become, I think, kind of a hallmark of who we are and the way that we present ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask, because now I feel like this is definitely a brand that we can say has staying power. And so I wanted to ask, if you were advising an up and coming entrepreneur in the drinks business on how to build a brand with staying power, what advice would you give them?
It's a different moment now than it was when we started, but I think the fundamentals are still similar. I mean, I think you have to know who you are, and you have to push at those boundaries, but also know when you've stepped across that line and you're doing something which isn't core to who you are, and be willing to prune it back. Because I think of wine, I think of wine as sort of the ideal product for long tail marketing. Like, we are a medium sized winery, whatever, small to medium sized winery. We're making, say, we make 35,000 cases of wine a year. How many fans do we really need? Like, we probably need 100,000 fans, something like that. How many regular wine drinkers are there in America? 50 million, something like that. So it's a pretty small percentage of the overall wine drinking audience who we need to be excited about Tablas Creek. And I think it's a mistake to try to chase too broad a swath of that audience. I think wine is a great thing for, like, establishing who you are, and then working as hard as you can to tell your story so that the people who are going to like what it is that you do find you. And I think you can do yourself a lot of harm by kind of jumping after this new trend or that new trend, because you are more likely, I think, to disappoint or frustrate or confuse your current customer base than you are to necessarily land on this new customer base, which is going to be excited about the new thing that you're doing. So I think, if there's something that I've learned, it is, like, be consistent with who you are, and then work like hell to try to tell your story.
Yeah, yeah. That definitely resonates. I mean, I think of Tablas Creek and kind of how the outreach is. Granted, I'm in the trade, but I do think of it as like very just educational and focused on conveying benefit, right? Whether it's like, here's how we're helping to, rebuild vineyards, or here's how we are providing value via alternative package, or what have you. But I think it's, I'm curious to know, like, beyond sort of the educational, how else do you find it effective to reach out to consumers? Because I find, I see like the biased version of all the education, but I think they're in that first touch of how you're reaching out to new consumers. What channels or strategies do you find work the best?
I'm sort of a believer of having lots of channels. I mean, we live in a world where your audience is going to be pretty fractured. They're going to be paying attention in lots of different places. Um, so we are super active on social media, across all of the different social media platforms. Um, as ones sort of fade from relevance, other ones sprout up, and we try to make sure that we're not ignoring the new ones just because they're new. I think that the blog that I started or almost 20 years ago now, has turned out to be an incredible value in terms of this longer form ability to tell a story and to connect with people, particularly to connect, I think, with other people in the business, other writers, other people who are maybe like doing research on a particular topic. I mean, I hear again and again from people that like, I'm working on my WSET diploma, or I'm working on my Master of Wine paper, and I keep ending up on the Tablas Creek blog because like you've written about these things that I'm interested in, and I feel like we're then reaching people who are in a position to reach other people. But beyond that, I mean, I'm still a believer in working with traditional wine media. We still send out samples to 30-ish writers every time we have new releases. We still publicize scores that we get. And then we try to make sure that we have a good reputation and can be a source of good referrals from wineries that are in our neighborhood or in our category. So
Yeah.
we do a lot of work within Paso Robles to make sure that if somebody goes to a winery down the road and says, "Hey, where else should I go?" Like I'm always really want people to say, "Oh, you should check out Tablas Creek because you like this and they do that." So um, we do try to be active in industry events, try to speak on panels, and get up on stage in front of consumers for consumer events. Just, I mean, it sounds sort of scattershot, but I think our audience is potentially everywhere, and if we can be active in as many different places as possible, it gives us the chances that we need to continue to bring in new people.
Yeah, I think Tablas Creek has I think it's like a case study for brands in how to have people in the industry start to tell the story for you. So I use Tablas Creek's actual website. I've used it in several presentations to industry groups where I've said, okay, Tablas Creek is a really effective, has a very effective strategy of, generating press and working with the press. Well, why? Okay, yes, there's the story and all of that. But also, Tablas Creek has a website that is so accessible. You have the logos up, you have vineyard photos, you have wine photos, you have all of this information that journalists and art directors at magazines, for example, need in order to get their job done at the end of the day. And I think a lot of other wine websites and spirits websites, other categories, they're not thinking about how to benefit their industry partners, right? And I think that's a real unlock that Tablas Creek has understood from the get go, because there's so much goodwill around this brand in the industry. Probably no small part of that is that journalists, partners, etc., are able to literally do their jobs because all of the assets are there and the communication is clear and transparent. So I think that's a major benefit.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's interesting because I mentioned briefly that I spent 4 years working in tech before I came out to rejoin the family business. And one of the things that I did is I actually taught classes in information architecture. And so the idea, I think people sometimes don't realize how task oriented most people are on websites. People go to a website to to answer a question that they have or to find a resource that they're looking for. And if you're not thinking about your web design from that perspective, you are almost certainly missing opportunities and frustrating people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about your customers some. What demographics are most represented amongst your customers? Do you have any generational lifestyle data that you can share?
Yes, I am. Yes, I do. But I'm also less convinced that this is necessarily a really critical way for us to think about our customers. I know looking at our like our wine club members and our best direct to consumer customers, they skew older. And they skew older because that's the average visitor to Paso Robles. I remember an old Silicon Valley Bank State of the Industry report where they shared the demographics of visitors to the major wine regions in America, and Paso's demographics were the oldest. And I think that's largely determined by geography. There is not a city with a big, like, active, younger, successful working population that's super close to Paso. The nearest would be a place like San Jose, which is 2.5 hours away. The Bay Area is 3.5 hours. LA is 3.5 hours. So it's different than like the Willamette Valley that has Portland right there, or Santa Barbara County that has LA right there, or Napa and Sonoma that have San Francisco right there. So you don't have to, but like it is much more likely if you're coming to spend a few days in Paso Robles that you are at a place in your life that you are probably more established. You are probably not traveling with kids. It's not particularly a great destination for kids at this point. So you probably have people like sort of empty nest and older who are most likely to come to Paso Robles and therefore most likely to visit wineries, therefore most likely to sign up for our wine club. That is not the same audience. That's a piece of the audience, but that's not the same audience that we have if you look at, say, our social media followers, which skew a lot younger. And we don't have good data, unfortunately, on like who is buying our wines out in the wholesale world from restaurant and retail. But my guess is that it does tend to skew quite a bit younger than it does for our wine club members and our direct to consumer customers. And one of the things that I really noted from some of the industry conferences that I've been to over the last year or two is that different cohorts, different generations are looking for different sorts of experiences when they go to visit wine country. But one of the things which all of them really have in common is this desire to support businesses that are run in a way that is consistent with their values. So that kind of environmental approach, the care for your farm workers, the use of resources, all of those sorts of things. I think it's one of the things that attracts really across demographic bands.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably helped us a little bit with younger consumers without alienating some of the core supporters, wine lovers who make up the base of our customers.
Yeah, and you mentioned that tasting room visits and wine club sales were mostly flat last year, but phone and internet DTC sales were way up, like 20% up, which seemed like a pretty significant gain. What do you think drove those gains?
I think we've gotten better at the business side of what we do. So one of the decisions that we made during COVID, so in the immediate, like right during the shutdown and immediately after, is we're like, I guess we need to be reaching out to our customers more often. We had sent a note to our wine club members once a month, and we were sending a note to our broader mailing list once a quarter. Like that was how often we were reaching out by email. We're like, we should probably do more than that. So we went to reaching out to our wine club folks twice a month and our broader mailing list folks monthly. And that was, it was such a no-brainer. I think most people don't make enough use of their people who have self-identified as fans on their lists. And that was a huge driver behind the 400% growth that we saw in shipped orders in the aftermath of the COVID shutdowns. But one of the decisions we made last year is that, we should probably move to doing weekly emails out to our wine club and mailing lists and move from doing these sort of newsletter style 5 or 6 section longer pieces to doing single subject emails each week. And then we do have once a month, we'll do a longer kind of newsletter thing where we'll do a lot more education and dive into that. But to do more frequent emails, and I think that was the single biggest driver that we saw in 2024 is that move to um, both simplify and increase the frequency that we reached out to our existing list.
Yeah, it sounds like a really smart optimization. You also had noted that export markets were a key growth area last year, with sales up 126% in that business unit. So, obviously it's pretty hard to predict what's going to happen with tariffs right now, but I was curious to hear what were some of the markets that were showing growth?
So historically, we have done an export offer every year to the network of agents that the Perrin family uses around the world. So they're in like 70 countries, and not all of them are viable markets for American wine. But we do historically an offer to maybe 15 export markets each year. But we've done it with the explicit sort of admission that like these agents should buy what they can sell, because we are not in a position that we can go and spend a week in all of these export markets and help them sell it. So that has meant that in many cases the quantities have been pretty small, and in some cases a market might buy wine 1 year and then not buy a Tablas offer for 2 or 3 years while they work through that inventory and then buy again. It's been very like kind of scattershot and haphazard. But I had invested a little bit of time and money in working the UK market just before COVID and then in 2023. And we had seen a huge amount of growth in the UK. So to the point that in 2023, it was the majority of what we were selling in export. And my thought was that I should try to put a little more effort behind our export sales. I mean, given that we saw that domestic sales were probably going to be flat for a little bit, we should make a little more of an effort in export. And so I made the decision to visit our 5 top export markets all in 2024. And so that was Japan, South Korea, Canada, the UK, and Germany. Those are our top 5.
Yeah.
And there were different things that brought me to different places. There was a conference in Montreal that was in the beginning of 2024 that I got a chance to tack on a few days at the end and work with our agents there. There was a Wine Institute sponsored tour of some of the top Asian markets where Paso Robles was the featured region that I got to piggyback onto to go to Japan and Korea. And then I made a trip to the UK and to Germany before a visit to France to see the amazing new cellar that they were building at Beaucastel. So, like, I kind of had reasons to go to all these places, but it gave me a chance to hit all 5 of those top export markets. And it's amazing how much of a difference even a slight push will give to a market that you have been giving no support to over the years. So I was actually really excited for our export sales this year. I think we had potential to do a lot of additional business in Canada, particularly, which should be the largest export market for a California winery. We had good programs in place in the UK, and then we were going to see additional growth in other places. And of course, Canada has turned out not to be a viable market for American wine at this point this year, because they pulled all of American products off the shelves in response to bullying from the Trump administration. So that piece of my master plan didn't exactly play out. But we have seen continued growth in the UK. I'm going to be going back there in September, but like already we have sold as much wine to the UK this year as we did all of last year. And last year it represented again about half of what we sold globally to export markets. So I don't think this year will be the shining success that I had hoped it would be in our export markets, but I also don't think it'll be a disaster. Which
Yeah.
at this point I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Speaking of challenges, what has been the biggest challenge that you faced so far at the helm of Tablas Creek, and how did you resolve it?
Oh man, there's lots of challenges. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I've faced has been sort of scaling challenges. So as we have grown, I mean, we were an entirely estate winery that was going to sell all of its wine through wholesale, which did not require a lot of people. And then as we grew and we built the whole direct to consumer side of things, we've needed to build the structures and the personnel and the layers of depth that you need so that things don't grind to a halt when somebody who runs a department goes on vacation for 2 weeks. Um, so I think a lot of the challenges that I spend the most time and mental energy on are things that never really show up, hopefully never show up to a customer. They're things that are happening behind the scenes, their management, their personnel, their navigating these strong personalities and great people who we have in charge of their departments, making sure that they're willing to hand off responsibilities and um, communicate with other people, setting up regular meetings so that people aren't the information isn't siloed. Managers meetings, all of that. That's not very sexy in terms of challenges, but I mean they are what I end up spending the most time on, because without those pieces in place, it's hard for any of the other things to work. I don't know if that really answered your question, but
Well, no, people are complex. I think, managing teams at scale is one of the hardest things to do. How big is the Tablas Creek team? And like, how are they sort of divided into different departments or groups?
so we've got about 50 people total, between full and part-time, and the largest chunk of that is our tasting room team, where we've got like 6 full-timers and 17 or 18 part-timers now. Um, and then we've got a big chunk in the vineyard as well. We've got we made the commitment back in 1996 to give our field crew year-round employment. So we've got a full-time field crew of 8, plus a couple of managers out on that side. Then we've got 4 full-timers in the cellar, 4 in our wine club, hospitality, kind of phone events department, um, 3 in our back office accounting side, and then a director of marketing, a national sales manager. Um,
Yeah, it takes a village.
it does take a village. Yeah, it does. But it's also one of the things that, like, we are incredibly um, fortunate. It's not just fortunate; it's work to do it. But we are really lucky to have been able to keep the team that we have for so long. If you look at the people who head up our different departments, I mean, Neil, who's our director of winemaking, been our winemaker here since 1998, and Denise, who is our controller, has run the back office since 1996. And our John, our tasting room manager, has been here since '08. And Nikki, our wine club director, has been here since '05. And like, so we have a really long tenure, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And the fact that we can give people the chance to continue to be creative and grow in their roles and contribute to Tablas Creek is something that definitely I learned from the way that my dad kind of managed his businesses.
Yeah, I mean, that's rare and definitely something to be super proud of. So, I uh, I know we're going to run out of time here in a second, but I did want to get your perspective on this, which is, it seems every person in wine right now is debating what's wrong with wine. Why are we seeing declines? What's your thought about that?
I think it's demographic. I really do. If you think of who has been buying wine in America over the years, it has really been the story of the baby boomer generation. I mean, yes, like Gen Xers, like us. I mean, we have followed along that path, but still, if you look at who has been supporting the categories that are struggling, it is overwhelmingly wines that have been supported by baby boomers. And I am not gloomy about the prospects for the next generation stepping up and becoming serious wine lovers and wine drinkers. But if you look at kind of the environment, the economic environment that millennials entered the job market in around the financial crisis, or that Gen Z is entering the job market in after pandemic and inflation, everybody, the younger generations are years behind where baby boomers and Gen X were in their earning power at the ages that they are. So the idea that those younger generations are going to step in and A, be buying wine at the same price, or B, be buying the same wines that the baby boomers are aging out of buying, strikes me as like just never going to happen. So instead, wine is going to have to do its part to ensure that it makes the case that it's relevant to these younger wine interested drinkers who have more options before them than any previous generation did, but also have more exposure to and knowledge about wine than any previous generation did, because they have seen it on the tables of their parents as they were growing up. So again, I'm not pessimistic about this, but I don't think that wine has done a particularly great job at making its case to these younger consumers. And some of that, I'm sure, is because of the demographics of who owns wineries. Some of it is because people don't want to risk alienating that core customer that they've always had, and they're sort of stuck in the price range that they've put themselves. Some of it is that it's hard because California is an expensive place to run a business and to make wine. But I think it's possible, and I think with some creativity, it's definitely going to happen.
All right. And last question. So let's say that a drinks entrepreneur asks you for something to provide insight or inspiration. It could be a book, online class, industry group, person to follow, what have you. What do you recommend to provide the greatest insight?
Ooh. I would say, at least where I get a ton of insight from, is putting myself into environments where there's other people who are talking about this stuff. So that happens a lot at some of the industry conferences and symposia that I know you and I have both been at. So things like that direct to consumer wine symposium, or the unified wine symposium, or YVI down here in the Central Coast. Those are incredible resources that I think most people in the industry don't make enough use of. I know, like, if you think of something like that DTC symposium, where I think a ticket for it is like $700. Like, if I don't come out of an event like that with 10 ideas that will be worth more than $700, like, what am I even doing? I always come away from those industry gatherings with like a notepad full of ideas of things that we could implement. So there's that, and then there's also the added benefits, and honestly, the most fun part of it, which is all of the offline and around the sides, the lunches, the conversations that you have when you show up in the morning with the person who you're sitting next to at the keynote speech, and all of that. So I guess that would be my recommendation: is get yourself in person to the places where people are talking about all this stuff, and you'll come away with so much.
Well, that's fantastic advice. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the Business of Drinks. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks, Erica. I appreciate the invitation. This has been fun.
Welcome to Last Call. I'm Erica Ducey.
And I'm Scott Rosenbaum.
And today we're recapping Bar Convent Brooklyn for everyone who wasn't able to attend. First off, kudos to the Bar Convent Brooklyn team. This was the most packed of all the conferences that I've been to this year. There was hundreds of brands sampling and probably thousands of attendees. I attended several of the education sessions, and these were all overflow, standing room only. a real highlight for me was that we held our first Business of Drinks coffee meetup, which was attended by dozens of our listeners and some of our guests and supporters. So thank you so much to everyone who came out. That was such a wonderful way to kick off the conference. So Scott, what did you find interesting this year at Bar Convent?
Yeah, it was a great conference, like you said. Really great weather on Wednesday, the second day of the conference, which helped mobility and moving around between buildings. There were a number of trends, right? I wasn't so much taken by any singular new product, but I felt in the zeitgeist a few things. First, I found myself questioning: is every other booth gonna have some type of coffee? Liqueur, coffee spirit? Are we at peak coffee? People who say like the espresso martini is passe or done with. That certainly wasn't the vibe I was getting at the conference. And I even see some innovation in this area. I had the opportunity to taste from the French producer Combier a clear coffee liqueur. So they distill it and they sweeten it, but they don't reinfuse or add any color or coffee after the fact. And it was delicious. Not yet released, but really curious, interesting thing that I'd love to see some cocktails made from in the future.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I think, the big thing that I heard people talking about really in every part of the conference, at the after parties, at nearby bars, at restaurants, and even in a lot of the sessions, was around the impending closure of RNDC. That news had just been announced, and it was a hot topic. So, distributor contacts, we're talking about layoffs and personnel moves across all of that tier. And several of the suppliers that I talked with were either looking for new representation, from any types of distributors, or, shifting from one distributor to another for a variety of reasons. So I feel like for me, the content of the conference was really around distributor conversations. And there was even a great talk. So there was this talk through the Park Street University stage called Distributor Collaboration in 2025, How to Navigate Today's Tougher Market. And boy, they did not pull any punches there. They had people from RNDC, Breakthrough Beverage, and Winebow, and they were not sugarcoating. So there was a couple things in this particular session that stood out to me that I thought would be useful to attendees who weren't able to make it to the event. First was that distributors are no longer just delivery partners. They're taking on more of a curatorial role than ever because they're turning away more brands than ever. And so they have to be incredibly surgical about what they are taking on. Melissa Lonan from RNDC, she said that her team is getting pitched by dozens of brands a day. And she just, they're saying no because the portfolio is full. So, one takeaway was that if you don't come to the table with a focused, well-funded plan, you're not getting in. Second, from that conversation was that there's a massive shift in mindset about what a win looks like. So Monique Houston from Winebow, who we've had on the Business of Drinks podcast previously in episode 49, she said something that really stuck with me, which is every initial sale is a liability. Right? So think about that. If you walk into a bar or a store and the product just sits there, you've now created a problem for your distributor, for the account, and for your brand. So the real work starts after the sale. And this was repeated in conversation after conversation. And then third, the big thing here that I think that everyone should be thinking about that's bringing their brand up is the brands that tend to be winning right now are really scrappy, local, and laser focused. John Oliver from Breakthrough, he said that the brands that impress him most now are the ones who are going really deep on a single market, even a single neighborhood. and showing pull there. So it's not hype, it's not press, it's not anything but sales velocity. And he's seen brands walk in saying, we've got 1,000 accounts in California with 3,000 cases sold, and we did it all self-distributing. And that is the type of thing that's turning his head. So those were the takeaways from that session that I was like, oh yeah, I feel like we want to share this.
I love it. I love it. Was it BCB or was it a business of drinks reunion? I sat in on a panel with Brian Rosen and who former guest, and he put some really stark numbers out there. He said if I were launching a drinks brand, a spirits brand, I wouldn't attempt to do that with less than $1 million. And I think people's ears really perked up to that end. On the same panel, Maria Perriman said that fundraising today she said it's as hard, if not harder, to raise $1 million today in 2025 than it was to raise $5 million in 2021. And again, I think people were really taken aback by that stark reality. But simultaneously, there was a lot of optimism at the conference, and not necessarily something that I've seen at conferences earlier in the year. There was, I'd say, a sense of community, particularly among different geographic suppliers. So here, two common themes I saw throughout the conference was what I'll call, alternative Mexican spirits. So not just tequila, not just mezcal, but those beverages on the periphery that we don't necessarily think of when we think of Mexico, like gin, like whiskey. Yes, there were agave adjacent products like Sotal there, but they were really trying to push the country as a whole rather than just a single category. Same thing with Japan. Saw Japanese vermouth, amaro, rum, gin, not just your typical whiskey. And for me, that was really particularly exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true. I did get such a great sense of community and energy from that conference that I think has been lacking in a lot of other industry events that I have gone to recently. So I do think, big kudos to the Bar Convent Brooklyn team for putting on such a helpful show in a variety of ways. The sampling opportunities, I think the discovery for any type of on-premise or retail account for distributors, etc., was really unparalleled. And it was really a lot of suppliers just bringing their passion to the table. The principles of the brands were behind the tables, sampling their products out, and it really was a pretty exciting event. So that's all we've got time for today, but thank you so much for joining us on Business of Drinks. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening, and tap the notification button so you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops. And help us spread the word. Click the star ratings and share on social because it really does help us find new listeners. Finally, if there's something that you'd like us to cover on the podcast, tell us. We're at podcast@businessofdrinks.com or reach out via Instagram or LinkedIn. We really do want to hear from you, and we do respond to messages. We'll see you next time.